all about America and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business. And I have chosen you to preach this evangel.
For all my free market healthcare robbing, stock stealing, retirement fund fucking with niggas. Fuck you little credit card scamming, jewelry stealing, crack selling, liquor store robbing motherfuckers. Shout to the homies, Carnegie, OG, Willie Randolph Hearst, Baruch, Rockefeller, the real Rockefeller, my main bitch Leona, pour out a little Louis XIII, Scott Rothstein, Jack Abramoff, hold your head, my real shop niggas, let's get this money. I spend my day peppering America overseas, pension for the workers, nigga please, embezzlement, etiquette, private settlement, I'm better with Confederate rhetoric from my mansion in Connecticut, foreclose a big close out the tenement, I twist words like a speech impediment, I hope you got good credit bitch, if not better get a new job with benefits, while I play golf with niggas and get cheddar with, new money buys brand new carrots, my old money bunch of great grandparents, you got grills in your mouth, I ain't mad at ya, I own every gold mine in South Africa, thanks baby you made me a billion, plus I own a building, for each one of my children's children.
Has resumed with recent Aleppo and talk about the people in the media have been saying about supposed atrocities are being committed by the Assad government instead of Aleppo, but in reality these are fabricated, and the atrocities instead of Aleppo were committed by the Free Syrian Army, the United States military, the Israelis by funding the rebels, but they were not committed by the Assad government. But you know, they're trying to blame this horrible situation completely on the Assad government, who did not start the war. The war was started by foreign mercenaries being imported into the government. Well, they responded to the what was going on, but it was foreign mercenaries being imported into the country was really what sparked the war, not the Assad. Supposedly, they try to make it seem like that he cracked down on the peaceful protests, but the peaceful protests quickly became violent. And yes, he cracked down to an extent, I think, on keeping them in hand early on in the early stages of the so-called revolution. There was no, he was not shooting at innocent protesters or whatnot, like some people would. Some people have claimed in the media, and Western bloggers and whatnot have claimed. And yeah, I think that people were talking about the audio was bad. Was bad earlier, and that was probably because of the I was using the mic. It appears that does not going to work. The headset that I have only had it for a short time, so it's a shame that it's already not working. But yeah, it looks like we're just going to have to go with this type of audio for the rest of the show. And now talking about the Assad government and what's going on with the regime change there, the plans is because partially, when you look at the reality of the Syrian situation, part of it is because of this pipeline that was wanted to be built between Israel and, so let's see, let me get the actual map up here so No, what exactly? I'm looking. I think it was Qatar to Israel, and it's going through Syria, and then there's the other pipeline which would go from Iran to Europe, which is what right now could be built with the current situation, but the the government, of course, and it's kind of similar to the Baghdad-Berlin Railroad that was before the World War One. There was a railroad between Berlin and Baghdad. Baghdad at that time was controlled by the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottoman Empire and Baghdad were both, Ottoman Empire and Berlin were both central powers. Ottoman Empire and Germany were both central powers. So that means that that was very inconvenient for the West. And what was one of the countries that the pipeline did go through was was Serbia, where the disruptance began. Remember, disruptance that started the whole Civil War, or not the Civil War, but the World War, and started the crisis. Remember, with the assassination of the Archduke of Austria, Franz Ferdinand, who was assassinated inside of Serbia on June 28th, 1914. And the Qatar-Turkey pipeline is the one that the United States backed, and it goes from Qatar through Saudi Arabia, up through Syria, and then through Turkey. Now, the Iran-Iraq-Syria pipeline, which goes through Iran, Iraq, and Syria, Russia-backed, and then it goes out into both apparently, could be rerouted to go to Europe. It appears both would have an ultimate destination of Europe with these plans. And the pipelines is one of the real reasons for the regime change, and also the fact that Syria does not have a Rothschild bank, and they don't pay for oil with dollars. The petrodollar, as it's been dubbed, is called the petrodollar because it's backed by the trading of certain commodities, including petroleum, and oil being backed in, or the dollar being backed by oil, and the fact that this country won't spend dollars for oil, of course, upsets the bankers as it makes their fiat currency weaker, the United States dollar, which should be called the Federal Reserve note. Really, it's not really any bit American. It's a private bank, and Americans use it, and multiple other countries use it, but it's not really American by any means. The Federal Reserve is a private bank inside of is a private bank, and there's no American part about it. It's a lot of, in fact, foreign bankers, the Rothschilds, those are the people behind the Federal Reserve, but it's not American. It's not part of the American government, unlike common misconceptions that people think they see the term federal, but really ultimately is Federal Express, which is the best way to, I would say, describe it. Is that just because it's federal in the name doesn't mean that's part of the United States, part of the United States government, and ultimately that bank loans the money to the United States. By loaning that money to the United States, they get charged a debt. This debt is passed on via the IRS to us, the taxpayers. So we pay our taxes to the Federal Reserve, ultimately to the people that own the Federal Reserve, which are the Rothschilds and the other bankers at the top of the Federal Reserve. And Syria does not pay for oil for the United States dollar, and also you can see how that when it comes to something that's not backed by anything, it's a paper money, or not even a paper money, it's a paper currency. A money is something, it's either a metal of intrinsic value or it's something backed by a metal of intrinsic value, which is neither. It's a currency, and a currency is decided, the value of a currency is decided by whoever controls the currency. In this case, the Federal Reserve bankers, they're behind the Federal Reserve. And by the way, if anybody wants to call in at any point in the show, 718-717-8296, 718-717-8296. If you want to call in, voice your opinion, your Voice of Rebellion Radio. Now going into this new year and and looking ahead, I think one of the main things we got to look towards is that South America, and the fact is that there's a lot of unstableness down there, and the potential for potential regime change down there, unfortunately, or other disruptances of different natures. And, well, you could see what's happened inside of Venezuela, is that in Venezuela they've sponsored this counter-revolution of people these people are not, looks like grassroots protests, but it's ultimately not grassroots protests. These are paid I would say this, is that a lot of them belong to, there's a United States Embassy agents inside of the protest, and or people that work for the United States Embassy. The United States Embassy is ultimately, can be more destructive than bombs or anything, is having a United States Embassy in the country. And there's people that are representing the United States Embassy inside the protest, and they're instigating further instability and further angst against the Venezuelan government. And I think that Venezuela, though, however, has been pretty good at preventing any more steps against their government being taken by subversive elements inside the country. In fact, Venezuela has had 2 coup attempts since the 98 election of Hugo Chavez, including the 2002 coup attempt where the military was deployed, and even Chavez was, claimed to have been taken out of power. Carmona was claimed to be in power, and ultimately Chavez returned with like 1 million supporters behind him to retake the power, retake the palace, and that failed. In 2015, they were able to stop it well before any of that happened, like what happened in 2002. In 2002, what happened was because the media inside the country, partially, the media was all but one channel was controlled by opposition to Chavez, and including CNN was allowed all the way up to very recently inside of Venezuela. There's very good freedom of expression inside the country, which, unlike what is claimed here in our media, is that Venezuela has this place there's no freedom of expression. There's no, they try to make it seem like it's a place with no rights and people are living under a despotic regime, but ultimately the people live with more freedom of expression than here in the United States. Because I can tell you that if anybody in a major news network called for the assassination of the sitting president, that person be in jail, possibly held at Guantanamo Bay, the next day. There's that news. Those news reporters down there were some that were calling for the assassination of Hugo Chavez, and the coup was pretty much called upon via the media, and only one channel at the time, which I think would be made the predecessor to Telesur. There's a couple of pro-government channels now. They have Telesur that came about in 2005, a few years afterwards, which is like financed by various left-wing governments across the region. Marcio Macri recently got rid of Telesur from Argentina, so now that's showing that the hypocrisy, these people that screamed about the lack of freedom of expression, and then this man cracks down on the freedom of expression when he goes against the right wing. Now that he's in power, Marcio Macri is acting like a dictator, like the dictator that he claimed Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner was, but she wasn't. And now he's even indicting her for a bullshit corruption charge that is similar to like what they tried to put on Dilma Rousseff, which never successful in impeaching Dilma Rousseff in Brazil, and what they were able to do it was a little bit different, but what they did to Fernando Lugo in Paraguay, which they got him when he was sick with cancer. They brought him down, took him out of power, and then Horacio Cortez took power. So now you can see how they slowly, 3 of these have been with what you could say, well, Argentina was done via an election, but the other 2 were done via parliamentary coups. And Peru also now, with an election, has brought in a right-wing puppet of the United States, a man that lived in the United States for many years, worked with the World Bank. He's not even, he has a Polish descent. He's not really, this amount of Peruvianness is not really evident. What he seems to be is more just a businessman than somebody that should be representing the country. And Kuczynski, that's the new president over there in Peru, is now their president. This is the man that's going to represent the country for the next few years and is ultimately going to probably somewhat fall in the steps of the former right-wing regime, which is Fujimori, who used to control the country from before 2000. And actually, the person that Kuczynski ran against was Fujimori's daughter. So it was an election of really 2 terrible candidates, but there was also Victoria Mendoza. And that was the candidate that would continue on the pink tide and the better policies of Humala, who might not have been perfect, but Humala at least sided with the South American neighbors rather than siding with the United States, Israel, and foreign countries. Like Mauricio Macri is getting tight with Israel, is getting tight with the United States, is getting tight with Britain, while you also have Horacio Cortez tight with the United States, tight with Canada, tight. Really, the general theme is just being tight with international countries. These various leaders that also, Mauricio Macri is, to no question at this point, has acted in an authoritative manner and is no longer ruling the state of Argentina from what could be called a democratic process. This is being controlled by, it's a one-man show practically, Mauricio Macri, and the people of Argentina are going to suffer, similar to what happened in 2001 with the economic crisis and the freezing of the banks and many other of these terrible things that used to happen inside of Argentina. In fact, prior to the Kirchners, one of the big events that happened in Argentina that kind of positioned their people and how they see other countries was the bombing of the synagogue in 1994, which probably, it seems to be kind of suspicious. There's a possibility that might have had Mossad fingerprints on it, and that would show the far-reaching scope of Mossad operations that they'll even get involved with something all the way in Argentina. And the lesson that should be learned about the South America is that I think that ultimately these governments left an opening for these dictators, that come in, and now Kuczynski, Macri, these are the people that are just going to be dictators for the United States government. They're going to be Operation Condor. This is Operation Condor 2.0 that's happening right now, and it's happened all over again. It's deja vu. This happened in the 70s. This happened in the 80s. This happened in the 90s. Often with the same dictators controlling the countries for all that time. The United States were able to exert their will over these small countries and were able to exploit and were able to also round up many dissidents in the countries. it was part of Operation Condor was the rounding up of the dissidents, and some people say 1 million victims were in this, or 1 million people were killed in Operation Condor across South America. South America were some of the biggest victims of regime change, where in cases like Brazil, they had a uh, fascist dictator installed, and it was a series of fascist dictators with a military dictatorship ranging about 20 years. You had Venezuela, military dictatorships ranging, or maybe not military dictatorships, but uh, uh, thinly veiled uh, democratic dictatorships that were there for all the way up to the 90s. And then you had in Chile a military dictator ruled the country for 18 years. And when you talk about these democratic dictators, it's that Copa and Acción Democrática were practically two of the same party, and there was no significant difference between them. They were ultimately just show parties, kind of like the Republicans and Democrats, to make it seem like there was a difference, but ultimately they stood for pretty much the same things. Carlos Andrés Perez was kind of like the central dictator around Argentina from the 70s all the way up to the 90s. This man was responsible for the Carazaco, responsible for mass starving during these years where a lot of people were very poor in the country. And because of the economic policies and whatnot, a lot of people just went without. And it was a country that didn't need to happen. This is a very oil-rich country, and that's what they learned years later, is that this didn't need to happen. Now, they talk about the starvation that's happening now inside of Venezuela, but it's widely exaggerated. And I'll explain. Is that the is that nowadays compared to then, is that then they actually there was no government stores to go to. There was no there wasn't really any looking out for the poor classes inside the country. Nowadays there are. The claims are coming from shortages that are happening inside the country that don't have to do with really the economic policies, but rather a regional drought that's affecting Colombia, it's affecting Venezuela, and so it has to do with the oil prices dropping. But it's becoming widely obvious that the media seems to make up a story every day. There's a new story about some, apocalyptic type thing happening in Venezuela. That the grocery stores are empty. The government is telling people to learn how to live in the wild and stuff like that. In reality, what's actually happening is that some things are short, some things there's not as much of, and there's a problem with a little bit with the inflation of the money, apparently, but it's exaggerated, and it mostly comes from, I think, black market. In the black market, the dollars to Bolivar exchange rates all fucked up, so it's coming from misleading reports what's going on down in Venezuela, and it's definitely nothing in comparison to how the 80s were, and that's what would happen if the opposition was to take power inside of Venezuela. If you had Henrique Capriles as the president, and just look at the name, Capriles Radonsky, is that Capriles Radonsky's allegiance isn't to Venezuela necessarily, and I don't say that it doesn't have anything to do with him being partially Jewish, but it has to do with the fact that his connections, economically, politically, seem to be back to the United States. He has a lot of reasons to want to create a relationship with the United States to become one of the people on the ground floor of this new investment that would be a pro-American United States. And when Capriles almost got elected in 2013, and ever since, it almost seems like these people are just crying that they lost, and they lost fair and square in 2013, and now they have to wait till 2018 for their next election. And the people obviously said that they still, even though that it's not Chavez, they just wanted to continue the progress of the Bolivian revolution after Chavez died. when Chavez, there wasn't even much of a contest between him and Capriles. But Maduro and Capriles is a little bit closer because he wasn't Chavez. And Maduro wasn't really a household name inside of Venezuela. He just recently became the vice president inside of Venezuela. And in weird ways like Truman, but not a puppet of the globalists and the bankers. But, had only been in the vice presidential position for a short time, then all of a sudden is called up to be the president. Even though it wasn't, like they called him up and then he was stuck at that position. They had the election because it was within the first year of the term of Chavez's fourth term as president. If he would have died in 2014 after January 10th, then he would have been Maduro would have automatically became president and no election needed. Now there's another rule that after a certain time inside the term, a recall election can't be called, and there was a recall election against Chavez in 2004. It was another attempt, but that failed. They ultimately said no to the recall referendum, and over 55%. It was a sounding victory to the left wing inside of Venezuela, and Venezuela continued on with opposing the United States, Israel, and foreign influence. And ultimately, Chavez's rhetoric, I think, got stronger as he as his time went on inside of Venezuela as being the vice president or as being the president. By 2008, 2009, that's when some of his some of the more tense times with the United States came about. Even though at first Chavez claimed, or Chavez seemed to have showed some hope that Barack Obama would be somewhat different than the last administration, which quickly realized that there would be no change, and that they would still try regime change against the country, and that Barack Obama was the same corrupt puppet that Bush was, and that ultimately inside the system, there is no good presidents or bad presidents. And if Chavez was alive today, it definitely would definitely not think much is going to change with Trump. And ultimately, I think that with Trump's rhetoric, he would have already denounced Trump a long time ago. Trump is a madman, corporate puppet, and even though that he's a billionaire, he's still a puppet, because to say that he can't be bought is to say that the Rothschilds are not as rich as they are, when they are obviously much richer than Donald Trump. The Rothschilds also have the power in order to intimidate Donald Trump and to pressure Donald Trump. The Rothschilds ultimately will still be the ones that are calling the shots for the United States, and that's the unfortunate reality. And people seem to be getting all excited about the January 20th date approaching, and Donald Trump's inauguration officially happened, and Donald Trump officially become the 45th president of the United States. But Donald Trump is again one of the same. It's just another with more years like Obama, more years of Bush, more years of the Clintons, more years of the Bushes, of the Bush and Bush Senior. It's more of the same, and I would say that it seems a lot of the people are the same people that voted for Obama, voted for Trump, believing the rhetoric, not seeing the facts, and seeing that it's thinly veiled the lack of change that happens between presidents, and they'll have the different excuses saying that it's Congress, saying it's that it's the power, it's the checks and balances, the Supreme Court, but really it's the bankers that are ultimately behind it. It's the Congress, bankers, the president, Supreme Court, they all have the same agenda. And Trump, if he does have a different agenda, won't last very long. And I don't think he has a different agenda. When he comes to Israel, he talks about how friendly he's going to be to Israel, and that he calls Obama tough on Israel. When you look at this, is that during his presidency, there's only been one resolution with the United Nations Security Council that he voted against or voted for, that the United States voted for during his administration. Well, Reagan, there was like 12, and no one says that he was tough on Israel. Ford, there was 2, and he was only there for 2 years. Nixon had multiple. Johnson had a few, which he's the president that said that when when our ship was attacked by the United States by Israel, they said, I don't care if every one of those men drowned, I don't want to embarrass Israel. So you can see that ultimately this doesn't really mean much. This, people are making out this United Nations Security Council resolution to be more than it is. It's nothing more than really something that says, pretty much stop doing this thing right here, or else we're going to be kind of pissed, but we won't do anything, or we're going to say we're pissed and we won't do anything. That's Ban Ki-moon. Didn't do anything really during the 2014 slaughter of the Gazans, so I don't think that he's going to do anything now with the settlements. And it really shows that it's ultimately the best way to describe it. It's a game of charades between Israel and the United States. That the United States pretends to be slightly mad at Israel for a second, but in reality, they're still giving plenty of money. There's still going to be on their hands and knees for Israel. And I see the chat room finally started to get going there. Hi everyone in the chat room. And yeah, the 50th anniversary of the USS Liberty is June 8th, and we're nearing the 1-year anniversary of when I interviewed the USS Liberty survivors. I interviewed them actually twice here on UCY, and on my show, I interviewed them in last January, and I interviewed them back in December 2015. Those were both 2 very good shows, and if you get a chance to check them out, definitely do. The USS Liberty show is it was pretty cool to actually hear the first-hand perspectives of these people that survived that ordeal, and to hear people in the United States military that woke up to the lies of Israel. A lot of people that ultimately are in the United States military circle, they believe that the United States government must protect Israel, but not realizing that that Israel has actually attacked American servicemen before. Israel is killed 34 Americans and injured over 170 in the USS Liberty. And some of the injured people were on my show. Those people were injured during the USS Liberty. I don't know about all of them, but I think Ronald was injured during the USS Liberty incident, and a lot of these people now have gotten very old, and now there's not many of them left. And to be able to interview them, almost 50 years after it happened, is pretty cool. And these people are now in their 70s and 80s. You don't get a chance to interview somebody from a historical event like that every day. Somebody from all the way back in an event that happened in the 60s, an event that really is a unknown event in United States history, even though it should be a major event. The USS Liberty incident is perhaps one of the biggest events that's happened in United States history, because it shows that the United States government won't do anything to punish Israel, even when they attack our own military, because ultimately there was a hidden agenda, which was the start of war with Egypt. And that war with Egypt never actually happened. But it ultimately, but it ultimately did. From then on out, we did have very tense relations with Nasser, and before that, it was actually wasn't it, but it started with tense relations with Nasser. What started the tense relations with Nasser was the Golan affair, where when they felt Eisenhower and Nasser were cozying up, they decided that they were going to activate a terrorist cell inside the country that attacked the United States military. So ultimately, Israel's been responsible for 2 attacks on American servicemen. They have attacked American servicemen twice, but yet the United States government, again, bows down to them. And, yeah, so I had the number right. 34, 171 wounded, and the USS Liberty was heavily damaged, but it did not sink. And it was, Ronald, he claims by the grace of God is the reason why the USS Liberty didn't sink. It was heavily attacked. And the compensation, Israel tried to pay, their way out and try to say that, and try to make it seem like it's all okay when they pay their compensation. Back then it was $3.3 million, a little over $3.3 million, and they paid a little bit more to the people that were wounded. They actually paid $3.5 million to the people that were wounded. However, and they paid a little bit more, so they paid $17 million. But remember, we send them $5 million or $8 million daily, and $5.5 billion annually. So if we're sending them, it's not really that much of a dent into the cash that we give to them, just for being them. Again, we don't get anything back from that. And what we actually got was an attack on our servicemen, and during the incident, the United States officially took a neutral stance. Some Zionists will say that this was a provocation by the United States on Israel, and that's why that they were attacked. And I remember actually, talking with somebody on the radio, and they were trying to justify the USS Liberty attack. But the only thing he said that he was against was the strafing of the people when they were in the water. But he called it a spy ship, and that that Lyndon B. Johnson, being the scumbag that he was against Israel. That's how he saw. He saw from that perspective, which is the same people that are, the Republicans that think that Obama has taken this strong stance against Israel, and that's part of the reason why our country's fucked up, because we're straying away from Israel. But in reality, we're so close with Israel. We have this parasitic relationship. That's what is part of our problem. And it was clearly marked as an American ship. The Israelis claimed that this was an Egyptian ship, but it was not an Egyptian ship. And ultimately, during this whole ordeal, there was a order to potentially nuke Cairo, it was in the works, in order to nuke Cairo, but it didn't happen. The war with Egypt didn't happen. World War III just about broke out with the United States of Liberty being attacked. And Israel, of course, with their crocodile tears, tried to act like, that they're so sorry for the accident and whatnot. But really, in reality, these people were also pretty much hushed up. These people that were actually attacked, Ronald and many others, were pretty much told that they couldn't talk about what had happened to them. And now that many years later, they finally are, and they're finally even getting some recognition from the United States military. And this is what the historical report that the IDF acknowledged, it was acknowledged that the IDF Naval Headquarters knew at least 3 hours before the attack that the ship was an electromagnetic audio surveillance ship of the United States Navy, but concluded that their information had simply gotten lost, never passed to the ground controllers who directed the attack, nor the cruise the 3 Israeli torpedo boats. And you know that, of course, that's bullshit. And the Israeli government says that 3 crucial errors were made: the refreshing of the status board, the erroneous identification of the ship as an Egyptian vessel, and the lack of notification from the returning aircraft from Israeli headquarters of marking on the front of the hull. So pretty much what I said is that they just pretty much totally dropped the ball. It was an accident, but of course it wasn't an accident. There was a secret agenda behind it. And that's one regime they also wanted to topple was Nasser. Because Nasser was a man that was actually helping his people and was against the United States influence there as well. He didn't really bow down to the Soviets either. He was in the non-aligned movement. So his closest ally was Tito, you could probably say. Or actually, it would be later, very late, it would have been Muammar Gaddafi. But Muammar Gaddafi was only there for about a year when Nasser was there. Nasser died in 1970. Gaddafi had took power the September before, and was very young actually. Gaddafi was only 27 when he took power, and Nasser was kind of like a mentor to Gaddafi. Who Nasser kind of said that he was he had a little bit of criticism for him, but ultimately Nasser really liked his vision, and Gaddafi had a lot of vision. You know, he wrote pretty much a alternative to communism, capitalism with his Green Book that spoke about, you know, being sovereign from both the Soviet Union and the United States and creating a country compatible with both Islam and socialism, which that's what Libya was about. You know, these claims in the United States that Libya was supportive of terrorism, that's not true. Libya did not support terrorists, did not support Al-Qaeda, did not support ISIS, and ultimately terrorists are what brought down Gaddafi. In the end, ISIS ended up becoming a thing inside of Libya. In fact, the same beaches where European tourists used to go to are now the beaches that are being used for people to be beheaded inside of Libya. It's a very tragic situation. That's what's happened there. But it's now the reality that the Libyans live in. And, you know, I seen the shameful Anthony Bourdain show with inside of Libya where he's going in there and trying to make it seem like it's normal when they got military checkpoints and you got these people acting like barbaric savages, really. You know, these people are talking about, this one guy is talking about when he killed Gaddafi and the shirt that he had, that he kept it since, the way that these people, they really didn't make themselves seem like peaceful, respectable people. They made themselves seem like pretty much, you know, like radical Wahhabis. You know, to people that actually know what's going on there. Is that that's probably, these are the people that were there. These are the people that these people were influenced by Wahhabi ideology, and a lot of them were extremists. You know, the idea of the moderate Libyan rebel is about as true as the moderate Syrian rebel. They're just about non-existent. Inside of Syria, the moderate rebels committed similar atrocities to what the Libyan rebels did inside of Libya, and you know they try to make it seem like that Gaddafi was responsible for all the bloodshed inside the country, and that thousands died because of him, similar to how they try to make Assad make him seem like he's responsible for the many people that were killed inside of Syria. But both claims are not true. The Libyan regime that is now in charge, which is, the fact is that it's a fractured regime, which part of the country is ruled by one pro-American group, the other part of the country is ruled by another pro-American group, and also the so-called not pro-American group that's all really a pro-American group, ISIS, controls another part of the country, even though their influence has diminished. But they, at one point, they controlled Gaddafi's hometown, Sirte. So it really was like a slap in the face to Gaddafi that later his hometown gets captured. And actually, that's where he ran to. He ran back to his hometown when the city was being, when the Tripoli had already been sieged, and a lot of the country had fallen into the rebels' hands. He was inside of Sirte when they found him there, captured him, and brutally treated him. Yeah, it was really Gaddafi was already dead by the time Sirte got controlled by ISIS, but it was a slap in the face to the people, the loyal supporters of Gaddafi, who had to see that go down. And I think that the future of Libya is pretty uncertain at this point. There's no really way to predict it. But I do see the situation getting better with the possibility of a green Libya again. With now the fact that the green Libya supporters have came out and are now become somewhat of a presence inside the country, and I think that within a few years potentially, who knows, Hannibal Gaddafi could be the next president of Libya, which that would definitely be something, and it'd be a slap to the face to the United States, who tried so hard for the regime change and then ultimately go the other way, kind of like what happened to Iraq. But what happened is that ultimately, Saddam was the more pro-American of the two governments that are now. Saddam was the more pro-American of the two, and Saddam was at one point an American ally, and actually helped the United States in the Iraq-Iran war. And later on, the current government that has taken place, in comparison to Saddam, and Saddam also gassed the Kurds, which doesn't seem like a pro-American action, but when you realize nowadays that the Kurdish seem to not really be on the side of the West, and they're fighting against the U.S.-backed ISIS inside of Libya. In fact, the Kurds have been a very effective force in fighting ISIS. Now, the United States tries to act like that they're the ones that have been really helping the Kurds, but ultimately the Russians have been really helping the Kurds. The United States has backstabbed the Kurds. I wouldn't even call it backstabbing, because they knew that they weren't going to really receive United States help, but the United States has funded the rebels against them. They funded ISIS against them. And the Kurds have taken the side of the government. There's two sides in this war. It's the government and the Kurds versus the rebels and ISIS. So it's really the Syrian government and the terrorists. Because the rebels, there's no moderate rebels. It's terrorists. There's no... the Free Syrian Army is not a moderate group. The Free Syrian Army has been shown to commit atrocities. They kill minorities. They crucify Christians. What more do you need to see for everyone to realize that this group is trouble? It's a terrorist cell. Al-Qaeda is in the country, and they're part of the opposition. ISIS is in the country and part of the opposition. ISIS is the biggest opposition group inside the country. That's what's happened, is that ISIS has taken over the spot that the Free Syrian Army used to have as the biggest opposition group inside the country. Now they control more territory than the moderate rebels. They control more than Al-Qaeda. They control more than Free Syrian Army. Al-Qaeda, of course, is not a moderate rebel. They're not considered moderate rebels, but just saying the other groups inside the country, they're all can be lumped together. There is no pro-democratic groups in there. There's no groups that actually respect minorities. And people that need to see the true character of the Free Syrian Army just go on YouTube and look at the video of the man who was eating the liver of a Syrian Arab army commander. And you can also see the videos of them claiming to have chemical weapons. If you need any more proof than that, you can just look at the realities that there's a ceasefire between the Free Syrian Army and ISIS, and that the Al-Qaeda and Free Syrian Army have collaborated, or they'll say Al-Nusra, ultimately the Free Syrian armies that were given to, or arms that were given to the Free Syrian Army by the United States, ultimately ended up in the hands of Al-Nusra, which is just a splinter sect of Al-Qaeda. And, all these names, people get confused, but that's how you can remember this, that it's ultimately a United States-backed foreign mercenary cluster that's been dropped inside of Libya in order to remove the popular government Bashar al-Assad. He has 70% of support inside the country. And really, the first leader that the United States really opposed and tried to do regime change against in the recent times was Nasser. And he was there from 1954 to 1970. He came after Mohammed Naguib, and actually it was 1956. So he was there for the later part of the Eisenhower administration, Kennedy administration, the Lyndon B. Johnson administration, the Nixon administration, and he was part of the people that were able to get the Suez Canal done. He was there for a lot of pivotal moments inside of Egypt's history, and after him, then a puppet would come about, Anwar Sadat, who, as was seen in his negotiations with Carter, just pretty much did what the United States told him to. And Anwar Sadat was just like the Israeli president, which was that he was no Israeli prime minister, that they were just he was just another puppet. Anwar Sadat ultimately betrayed the ideology of Nasserism and ultimately started westernizing the country. And Nasser's influence that he had on the Arab world, Sadat ultimately left that behind, and he didn't even look towards his Arab allies. He ultimately started looking towards Israel. Nasser was loved in his country, and and there was a lot of pivotal moments inside the country. In the outside the country, for example, the people wonder how that Saddam Hussein would get the power. That's like questions Americans don't seem to ask: is how did these people that in the Middle East even come to power? What's the stories behind these countries? And one of the stories, is that Iraq actually at one point was a close Soviet ally, with Qasim's power. Qasim was the leader of the country who was toppled in February 8th, 1963. By a Ba'athist Nasser's, Ba'athist Nasser's alliance toppled him, but Salam Arif, a Nasserist, was chosen to be the new president, and a similar alliance toppled the Syrian government on March 8th. And on March 14th, the new Iraqi and Syrian governments sent Nasser's delegation to push for a new Arab Union, but at the meeting, Nasser lambasted the bosses for facilitating to split from the United Arab Republic. And I think that he saw the future for the Iraq bosses movement, and saw that it was no good. The Syrian bosses movement ultimately led to Assad's, and the Assad's led a pretty peaceful and civilized country for many years, while Iraq, Saddam Hussein acted as a dictator that was backed by the United States for many years, and then later he had his little showdown with the United States and was removed. He was retired, is maybe a better way of saying it. In 1964, Nasser became the president of the Non-Aligned Movement, which was the group that was created by President Sukarno of Indonesia, Tito Yugoslavia, Nehru of India, and also Kwame Nkrumah was another founding member of it. Nasser played a significant part in the strengthening of the African solidarity at that time, and the Six-Day War also happened under him, which, the Six-Day War was what we almost got into. It almost led to World War III. And that happened, ultimately, if you look into history, is that the war was started by Israel. It was on the morning of June 5th, the Israeli Air Force struck an Egyptian airfield, destroying much of the Egyptian Air Force. For the next day, Israeli armed units had cut through Egyptian defense lines and captured the town of El Arish. Next day, Amir ordered the immediate withdrawal of Egyptian troops from Sinai, causing the majority of Egyptian casualties during the war. Israel quickly captured Sinai and the Gaza Strip from Egypt, and the West Bank from Jordan, and the Golan Heights from Syria. So all this, you see all the stuff that countries, Arab countries used to control. The West Bank used to be part of Jordan. The Gaza Strip used to be Egypt, and the Golan Heights, Syria, which now they still control to this day, all three of those sites. And the West Bank and Gaza are in the so-called Palestine. That's not Palestine; it's the occupied Palestine, and then Golan Heights is Israeli territory as well, which is really part of Syria. And I would say that the 67 war was one of the closest points that the United States ever got to World War III. And also, it says that it's if I read this right, it's so causing the majority of the Egyptian casualties during the war when they withdrew from the Sinai, which, I would say that who caused the casualties was Israel for striking that territory. And these people, even struck hospitals. Israel unleashed terrible atrocities on the Egyptian people, and Israel was responsible for the carnage that happened inside of Egypt during that war. They'll try to make it seem like it was Nasser's incompetence that did that, but it was actually not Nasser's incompetence. It was Nasser did what he could. Later on, Amr was replaced, Mohammed Fawzi, and 600 of the military, these people were loyalists to him, went to headquarters and demanded Amr's reinstatement. After Nasser sacked 30 loyalists in response, Amr's allies devised a plan to topple him on the 27th of August. Nasser was tipped off the activities. He convinced Amr to meet him at his home on the 24th. Amr ended up killing himself, apparently. But there was apparently there was a coup attempt that happened, and that was probably, I can imagine, that had the United States fingerprints on it. Talk about the regime changes and how they did in Venezuela. I'm sure they tried a similar thing right there in Egypt, is what looks like went down. And Nasser tried to strike back at Israel with the war of attrition. ordering attacks on Israeli positions east of the then blockaded Suez Canal. And in March, Nasser offered Yasser Arafat's Fatah movement arms and funds against Israeli forces. Now, you know what the thing that's ironic is that Fatah is now pretty much an Israeli lackey and doesn't represent the Palestinian interest at all. But then it was actually, I guess, somewhat hostile to Israel, and that's what's changed. Now, Fatah, and I would say Hamas too, they're just ultimately lackeys of Israel. Hamas is kind of just they don't do any real action against Israel. They launch some rockets, and it gives them the justification to go in there and bomb Gaza. And I'm not saying it gives a justification, but to the media it does. So if Hamas is a little provocation, it's just enough to give Israel a reason to do it to the media, or help them. I think they wouldn't even need the reason, but yeah, they don't even need the reason, because ultimately the media just spins everything in their favor. But it ultimately gives them it gives them more of a reason, and it doesn't do enough to actually do any real damage against the idea. They lose like 50 in a war, while the Palestinians lose 2,000. So Hamas is kind of it's kind of a fake organization that also has somewhat ties to the Muslim Brotherhood. And remember, the Muslim Brotherhood rose up against Assad, who was somebody that actually opposed Israel. I'm talking about Hafez al-Assad. So Hafez Assad faced trouble from people like the Hamas. Hamas is phony. But the Palestinian Front for Liberation of Palestine, they seem to be the only legitimate organization inside of Palestine that fights for Palestinians. They support Assad, and a splinter group of the Palestinian Front for Liberation of Palestine fights inside of Syria for Assad. In fact, some Palestinians fight for the Assad regime. Unfortunately, though, some Palestinians that get, like we were talking with Ali last week, is that some Palestinians get recruited by the Islamist propaganda of Al Jazeera, and they become fighters for the Free Syrian Army. And there's this propaganda that goes as far to even say that Assad and Israel have some kind of alliance, which they don't. Assad and Israel are very far apart, and the Free Syrian Army are backed by Israel. But that's how far the media can distort things from the truth. Like they were able to distort the position of Nasser, is that they try to make it seem like that Egypt started the war, but it was actually Israel started the war. They tried to make it seem like Nasser was some kind of madman, and ultimately Israel was the madman. Nasser was the best president that Egypt ever had, and now it's been 47 years since Nasser was the leader, and they still haven't been able to find someone similar. I mean, the closest they had was Sisi, and I mean by opportunity. He obviously turned out to be another Zionist puppet, and Sisi is doing the bidding of Israel. Sisi was a man that I used to defend on the network, but now I've gave him enough chances, and he's disappointed all the time. I remember, saying that, oh, well, he might be soon, turn the corner, and then he's gonna, actually start to stick it to Israel. He was just a little disappointed by Israel during the slaughter in 2014, but did not do any significant actions against Israel, where he could have made a huge statement against Israel. And also, Nasser died right after the Arab Union Summit, where he had a heart attack, and he died several hours after having the heart attack. And he was young, he was only 52. So it wasn't like he was an old man or anything. And there's definitely, he wasn't in the greatest health, but there's definitely speculation to say that he could have been poisoned, similar to what people say about Arafat, is that Arafat was possibly poisoned. And they did say that this is the unhealthy lifestyle. This is what they wrote about. I'm just going to say was wrote about him on Wikipedia. That Nasser had a few personal vices other than chain smoking, maintained 18-hour work days, rarely took time off for vacations. A combination of smoking and working long hours contributed to his bad health. He was diagnosed with diabetes in the early 1960s, and by the time of his death in 1960, he had arteriosclerosis, heart disease, and high blood pressure. He suffered two major heart attacks in 1966 and 1969. He was on bed rest for 6 weeks after the second episode. So, obviously he wasn't in the greatest health, but still, I just could always leave it open to the idea that he could have been poisoned. They say that there was likelihood that Chavez could have been poisoned. He died at 58 and was kind of a similar leader to Venezuela, like Nasser was to Egypt. And the investigation is still going on. I think that in the next few years we'll get an answer, and the answer is going to say something along the lines that Chavez did ingest some kind of foreign chemical that caused possibly some kind of disease. And they have the cancer weapon that can give some cancer. Well, actually, it would be a bacteria. They say the cancer could be created from bacteria, and then possibly with the right dosage of bacteria, Chavez could have received it. They try to make it seem like the cancer weapon doesn't exist, but the CIA definitely does have it. They worked on it. The KGB worked on it. The CIA worked on it. The CIA worked on many nefarious devices, and that's one of them, was a cancer weapon. CIA worked on it. We're at a little over an hour and 5 minutes through the show. If anybody wants to call in, 718-717-8296, 718-717-8296. Just going back to the chat to see what kind of any buzz has been going on in the chat room, and they try to with the current situation in Syria, they try to make it seem like there's this big rift between the Syrians and the Kurds, and that the Kurds are there's this big fighting between the Kurds and Syrians, but ultimately there's not that much fighting. They're working together, and they're working together to defeat terrorism. And I think that if they're trying to capitalize on that, if they can make it try to seem like the Assad government's alliance is weaker than it is, people might be more willing to get behind a war that they believe is more winnable. But ultimately, a war in Syria would be very difficult, and also with the fact of Iran getting involved, a war between Iran, Israel, the United States, a war between the United States, Israel, Iran, and Syria would be very disastrous. I mean, a lot of people would be killed, and a lot of people would be injured. And the United States government would send out these young men to fight in that war. A lot of them would die. This would be probably a war that would kill more people than Vietnam, Korea, or these few wars. It would probably be something similar to World War II and how many people were killed on the American side. Maybe not like what the Soviets lost in the war, but I could definitely see hundreds of thousands being killed if the United States was to enter a war with Iran, because it would be 15 times worse than Iraq. And the name of the guy that was the captain of the USS Liberty, and that's kind of weird. I feel like it probably was mentioned during the shows that I did with the USS Liberty survivors with the captain. It's like I just can't remember of the name. Captain, I can't recall knowing of the name. Captain McGonigal. Captain McGonigal. I was like, I never really saw that name, but Captain McGonigal was the captain of that ship that was ultimately set up by Israel to start the World War and start the war with Egypt. And luckily, their plan fell apart. And the USS Liberty ultimately, a lot of them did survive, and the truth about it got out. And 34 were killed. That's the unfortunate thing. Almost everyone on that ship was injured. It took a heavy beating from the Israeli forces. I mean, it was brutal. And luckily, also, that the war with Egypt did not start. Luckily, that there was no. Luckily, that ship didn't sink. Luckily, there's people who tell us about it. Luckily, it didn't end up like the Gulf of Tonkin, which was ultimately what justified a war with Vietnam. Remember, Vietnam was started from a false incident. It was a supposed attack on the Pueblo, which never even happened. It was a made-up incident that we now learn now is it had no truth behind it whatsoever. And this attack actually did happen. That's and the unfortunate part, people actually did die. There was no justification for this, for the USS Liberty, and I think it should be brought about on the 50th anniversary. We should definitely do some major thing here in the United States. There should be a real push to make sure that the USS Liberty is remembered as more years go on about it. And what's better year than the 50th year to really bring the awareness out to the people of what the USS Liberty, what happened to the people on the USS Liberty. And William McGonigal was the captain of the USS Liberty. He survived the attack. He died on March 3rd, 1999. Of course, they give him the Medal of Honor, but what good is the Medal of Honor when you've been lied about and that your incident is hidden up? And that's the thing, is that they did all this, gave them some money, tried to put some honor, give some honors, but ultimately they covered up the people that did this. Is that the Israeli Defense Forces killed these people, and they try to make it seem like that they properly honored these people. Properly honoring these people would have been telling them the truth, telling the world the truth about what happened that day. Also, by the way, this is a list of this guy's wars that he was involved in: World War II, Korean War, Six-Day War, the Vietnam War. Well, Six-Day War, I mean, that's, with the USS Liberty. World War II, Korean War, Six-Day War, Vietnam War. Let's see. Just reading up a little bit about this guy. McGonigal was severely wounded during the first air attack, and although the bridge had sustained heavy damage, he stayed and directed the ship, refusing to leave his post for medical attention. As the Israeli fighters continued their attack, he maneuvered the ship, directing its defense, supervising control flooding and fire, and saw to the care of casualties. Captain McGonigal remained at his battle station and continued to command the ship for more than 17 hours. It was only after a rendezvous with a U.S. destroyer that he relinquished personal control of the USS Liberty and permitted himself to be removed from the bridge. The combined air and sea attack killed 34 crew members, including naval officers, seamen, 2 Marines, and a civilian, wounded 171, and severely damaged the ship. Although the ship had a 39-foot wide by 24-foot high hull and a twisted keel from a torpedo impact, the crew kept the ship afloat and were able to leave the area under their own power. When the damage to the ship was assessed, A-21 rocket shell and machine gun holes were found in the ship's hull. So this guy, I mean, he did a pretty impressive act right there, and there was a lot of bravery that was shown when this attack happened. And you think that you would hear more about this guy. You think that this guy would be one of the heroes that would be talked about in the textbooks. And, you know, somebody that was involved with 3 wars. You think also that'd be mentioned. But again, they like to hide this whole event from the reality of the American mind. Is that they try to make it seem like that didn't happen. Which the United States government, of course, they with their what it is ultimately is that the United States government is not the same status of the Israeli government when it comes to the New World Order structures. The Israeli government's at a higher status. Netanyahu has a little bit higher position, and the Israeli government ultimately has a little bit more say of what's going on. And now you see with Netanyahu, and you see that his recent outburst, and you see the game that's being played. And as they try to make it seem like that our government has not been very friendly to Israel, more and more people seem to be flocking towards it. And you know, to Trump is the same effect as that by claiming that he's anti-establishment, even though that he is very much pro-establishment. He's gained some supporters, and it's turned a lot of people that could be looking towards the truth, but now they're looking towards lies. They're looking towards the lies of Trump and Netanyahu. And Netanyahu also, of course, he had a very strong relationship with Obama, and they try to make it seem like that there was this kind of hostile relationship between the two, but there wasn't. Obama ended up supporting the Zionist-backed death squads in Syria. He ended up supporting the tensions towards Iran. And Iran is actually getting close towards an election right now. And, you know, right now they have Rouhani that's been kind of soft on the West, but I can imagine that potentially, soon possibly one of the principalists could take power. And with a principalist in power, perhaps Iran's will be kind of the rhetoric that they had under Ahmadinejad, rather than kind of the weaker rhetoric that they've had under the current government. But it's ultimately we're talking about rhetoric, and the actual actions that still remains that Iran does not have a Rothschild bank, and Iran still backs the Syrian government, and it's a good thing. Is that Iran has been at the head of the Syrian government, and that actually one of the generals that's been really responsible for the whipping of ISIS's ass, which is the let me look up his name. He's actually one of the presidential candidates, and if he wins this election, I can imagine that they're going to be saying they're going to be again vilifying the president of Iran, like how they vilified Ahmadinejad. Ahmadinejad was heavily vilified by the media, and they dwelled on one thing where apparently they said he was a Holocaust denier, even though I think at a later point he repudiated that and said it did exist. So that's how they do, is that they say that they take your stance against Zionism, you take your stance against against the United States, and then they say that you're a Holocaust denier, you're a Nazi. They go down these absurd accusations, and the media can spin anything, even though that the ones that have ultimately backed neo-Nazis in Ukraine are the United States government. That we forgot about that. We forgot about that there's still a war going on in Ukraine, and the neo-Nazis have been backed by the United States government. Yet McCain just went over there saying that he's going to support Ukraine against Russia. And at one point, I saw that even Ukraine actually thought that they could beat Russia in war, and that's of course absurd conclusion. There's no way that the Ukrainian military would stand any chance against would stand any chance against the Russian military. But this is made, I guess, to the egos that Poroshenko and the people in his inner government circle have. And actually, what could be said about Aja Ahmadinejad is that maybe he did somewhat of a disservice he did somewhat of a disservice by leaving. He should have found a way to stay for a longer time, and to continue being somewhat of a face for people of the Arab world, for the people of the Middle East to look up to. It's like Assad being in the middle of the war. I guess the ideological face isn't quite there. It's similar to like Maduro right now, who faces his own crisis. He doesn't quite have the same face of the movement like Chavez did. The face of the revolution, the face of the Bolivian revolution, the face of the progress, the face of the people. And Aja Ahmadinejad doesn't quite have that. Aja Ahmadinejad did have that, but Rouhani doesn't have that. So I think that maybe they need a new face in there in order to maybe kind of re-spark the revolution, re-spark some of the zeal they had in some of the earlier stages in the revolution. And I say the revolution. It's an ongoing thing from 1979 on. It's been an ongoing. It's been an ongoing thing they've been working on in order to modernize Iran, in order to make Iran a country completely self-sufficient. Like I said, is that Maduro or Rouhani and Maduro are just not quite the face of that spark, the spark that is of this movement, the spark of this thing they're working towards. And I think that Rouhani's also worked a little bit too much with he was signing this nuclear deal in Iran, has actually kind of set themselves up to they've been lulled into a false sense of security. They actually believe that the United States is gonna make good on their promises, but ultimately the sanctions have not been lifted. Ultimately, the sanctions have not been. The sanctions have actually been worsened under the current current deal with the Iran deal. And Israel screamed about how bad the Iran deal was for Israel, but reality is that Iran's now kind of been put into check with these sanctions, they haven't been put in check because Iran still does what they do, but they've definitely, the pressure's been tightened on them. But yet, of course, Israel's going to scream and cry, and they act, Israel acts like the bratty teenager that every time they don't get what they want, they scream and call people names. And calling people anti-Semitic, calling people Jew haters. And Obama obviously is neither of those things. Is that ultimately Obama is just another, I'll say this, is that actually really in a way he is both of those things. He's an anti-Semitic because he's helping the bombing of Palestinians. The Palestinians are Semitic people that are being bombed by the Ashkenazi Jews that are the Israeli government, and most of the Israeli people are Ashkenazi Jews. They're not Semitic Jews. That also the Semitic people predominantly reside in Palestine. Palestine Palestine has a lot of Christians and Muslims. All these Jews that were in the Bible converted to Islam when the time of Muhammad came about, and a lot of these people also want to talk about the Palestinians. A lot of these people are also Christians, and these Christians have their rights impeded on by the Israeli government, and you don't hear much about it. From American Christians. A lot of American Christians loyally support. A lot of American Christians loyally support Israel, and don't even realize the irony of their support of Israel and what it ultimately does to Christians inside of Palestine. And that the Israeli government, a lot of these people see Christians as practically. The Israeli government practically sees Christians as lower, as inferior to the Israeli Jews in the country. And the Israeli, just be like being Christian, you're put at a lower status than the rest of than the Israeli Jew that lives there. Ultimately, that's Netanyahu supporting Israeli Jews the highest status you can be in Israel, and then a Christian would be a lower status, Muslim a lower status, a Palestinian Muslim living in Palestine would be about the lowest status you can get inside of, a Palestinian anti-Netanyahu Palestinian Muslim is about the lowest status you can get in Israel, and their rights are not at all protected. And these people are often killed in these operations against Palestine. That's what I'm saying. The Rouhani, you think, would have done more about, possibly, but would have been the slaughter of the Gazans in 2014. But it's like saying, what more can they really do? And they can't. Besides, they can't attack like Nasser did, and to try to reclaim lost land, because ultimately that didn't work out very well for him, and there was really no way that would not turn into an ugly war if Iran and Israel ever got into a war with each other, and Iran knows that. They ain't trying to spark any wars. And also how the Egyptians lost their land. They lost their land from a attack that was provoked first by Israel. They didn't provoke the war against Israel first. They came back later to take back the land that was stolen from them in that war against Israel. We're right now at 10:28. If anybody wants to call in, 718-717-8296, 718-717-8296. This is Chris J. here on a Sunday night, Voice of Real Radio, talking about regime change. And the United Nations Security Council resolution is interesting because you see the reaction, you see this somewhat though of you see somewhat of a telling of how, or you see somewhat of a revealing, somewhat of a unveiling of the nature of the Israeli control of our media on both sides. Is that despite that these people, Trump, in claiming that he wanted to make it America first, you see how these people talk about how we need to protect Israel, and you see on the Democrats, you see these people that are supposedly these people that are supposed to be against anything that Trump says or whatever, but ultimately these people are talking about our very important relationship with Israel, and both are like, no, we're better friends with Israel. No, we're better friends with Israel. No, Israel's our friend. Israel's our friend. But ultimately, both sides realize that both sides are tied to Israel. I think that ultimately the underlying thing is that between both parties is that ultimately they're going to keep sending more and more money to Israel. They're going to keep doing Israel's foreign policy bidding. And there was actually an instance where a man was at a Trump rally and said that he didn't want the United States military to be protecting Israel's interests anymore, and Trump shut him down. And he just says how Israel's a very important ally, we need to protect them. And there was also another time where somebody goes to a rally and is screaming Israel did 9/11, they just drown him out with a USA chant. So when it comes to Israel, Trump obviously seems to have the same position as the prior president and the president before that, which is to continue the unlimited support towards Israel, and I don't see much significant change towards that. And, talk about regime change, there's another country that comes to mind that they've been trying to do regime change, and that's Yemen. And that's an undertold story about the Saudi attacks on Yemen. Also, Saudi Arabia is ultimately just another Israeli ally. And when you realize that, it all starts to make sense why Saudis have been attacking Yemen the way they have. And the Yemen civil war that they've got involved in, which is the lesser known of the Middle East civil wars, this is another country with somebody of the resistance in power. And the resistance, I would say, that's Assad, that's Rouhani, and that's al-Houthi. Al-Houthi is the leader of the country, and the Houthis control the part that's important, Sana'a, but they don't control a lot of territory. But they're ultimately officially in charge of the country. A lot of the country is controlled by the Hadi-led government, and the Hadi-led government is U.S.-backed. Hadi was a U.S.-backed leader. He was the former president of the country, and pretty much most of the western areas controlled by the Houthis. A lot of the rest of the country is controlled by Hadi. Al-Qaeda controls a big part of the central of the country, which are allied with the Hadi government. Again, it's like another situation like Syria, where it's not explicit alliance, but it's obviously a secret alliance. And the United States has been involved in missile strikes in that. And the Houthis, they haven't gotten too much foreign support. They're backed by Iran in Syria, but they don't have any military support from Iran. The Houthi fighters, security forces, Republican Guard, this is the people that are on the Houthi side, and our al-Najran movement from mid-2015. But the Hadi government of the United States and missile strikes, Saudi Arabia is bombing Yemen, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Kuwait, Jordan, Morocco, Qatar, Senegal, Sudan, and even China has been involved in non-combat support. That's where Wikipedia says, United Kingdom, France. And, of course, there's the ISIS element of the country, which I think is small now. They have, but ultimately their sisters Al-Qaeda are involved with this. Al-Qaeda, ISIS is all the same United States backed destabilization bullshit. According to the map, there's only a little bit of ISIS control to the country, but a lot of Al-Qaeda control. And you can see down by Aden, you can see the Houthis are not too far away, but they have quite a bit, the Hadi government has quite a bit of a surrounding of Aden, which would be the major city for them to capture. Sana'a is the capital, and that's what is controlled by the Houthis. That's a very important thing. It's controlled by the Houthis. A lot of the area that the Hadi government controls is desolate area. For example, in what looks to be about the eastern fifth of the country, it's one city. It's Al-Qaeda. And then you got like you go towards like the whole, you go to like the eastern third of the country, and you got Tarim, Aruk. You got these smaller cities, but you got a lot of bigger cities in the western half. Yemen used to be Hey, sorry guys, I got knocked off the air there for a second, but I was just saying is that, is obviously Duterte is actually targeting addicts. Of course, they can't support him, but it seems that they've worked. The media campaign against him seems to be pretty strong. So I have to say is that it seems possible that there might be a turning point in the Philippines, a long-term American ally. And if that's true, Duterte will be eliminated very quickly if he actually sticks to forge a relationship with Putin, and also if he actually makes a considerable, if he actually makes any considerable progress against the United States.
Point of no return and nobody can stop it. Malcolm Little when he knelt before Elijah Muhammad, the comet that killed the dinosaurs, changing the earth. They love to criticize, they always say I changed for the worse. Like prescription pills when you misusing them, nigga. The Templar Knights when they took Jerusalem, nigga, and figured out what was buried under Solomon's temple, Al-Aqsa. The name is not coincidental. I know too much, the government is trying to murder me. No coming back like cutting your wrists open vertically. How could the serpent be purposely put in charge of the country? Genetic engineered sickness spread amongst me. My people are so hungry that they attack without reason, like a fucking dog ripping off the hand that feeds them. Immortal technique is treason to the Patriot Act. So come and get me, motherfucker, cause I'm not coming back. This is the point from which I can never return, and if I back down